I always believed marriage was a fortress, solid, unbreakable. For 8 years, I built mine with love, loyalty, and faith. But fortresses have weak spots, and mine was about to be breached. It started with the little things. The way Emily would lock her phone when I walked into the room. The sudden late nights at work, when she never used to stay past 6. The faint scent of a cologne I didn't own clinging to her clothes. I ignored the signs. I told myself I was imagining things, until the night I found the text. I miss you already. Can't wait until tomorrow. A punch to the gut. I stared at the screen, my heart hammering in my chest. I felt sick, my hands shaking as I scrolled up. Messages, dozens of them. A name I didn't recognize, Nathan, but a voice I understood all too well. The flirtation, the longing, the passion. The kind of passion she hadn't shown me in years. I didn't confront her, not yet. Instead, I became someone I never thought I'd be. A detective in my own marriage. The investigation, the next day, I followed her. She left work at 5:30 but didn't come home. Instead, she drove across town to a dimly lit cafe. I parked 2 spots away and watched from my car as she entered. And then he arrived, tall, dark hair, well-dressed. He kissed her as he sat down. Not on the cheek, not a friendly peck. A deep, familiar kiss. My stomach twisted. My hands clenched the steering wheel. This was real. I took photos. Not out of spite, out of necessity. I needed proof. I needed to see how deep this betrayal ran. Then, I saw something I didn't expect. A third person joined them, a woman. Young, early 20s, blonde. She slid into the seat beside Nathan. Emily and Nathan exchanged nervous glances. The girl leaned in, speaking hurriedly. Emily looked around, anxious. Nathan shook his head. Something was wrong. This wasn't just an affair. This was something else. The confrontation. That night, I laid the evidence before Emily. The texts, the photos, the truth. She didn't deny it. She didn't even cry. Instead, she whispered, "I never meant for you to find out." I laughed, a bitter, hollow sound. "That's what you have to say?" She hesitated, then leaned in. "You don't understand, Jake. It's not just an affair. It's complicated." I was about to unleash every ounce of pain and rage inside me when she said something that stopped me cold. "Nathan isn't my lover. He's my brother." The words crashed into me. "You're what?" She nodded. "He's my half-brother. I never told you because I didn't know about him until last year. Our father had an affair, and Nathan is the result. He found me. We've been trying to rebuild something." My mind reeled. The texts, the secrecy, the cafe meeting, and the "Girl?" I asked, my voice hoarse. Emily's face darkened. "Nathan got involved with the wrong people. He borrowed money from someone dangerous." "That girl? She's a warning. If he doesn't pay, they'll hurt her." I was drowning in revelations. So, the messages, the secrecy? Why lie to me? She swallowed hard. "Because I knew you'd never understand. I didn't want you caught up in this. And I didn't know how to tell you." My chest ached. Betrayal. Lies. Secrets. And yet, underneath it all, truth. I had braced for an affair, for heartbreak. I had never expected this. The choice. I had 2 options. Walk away, let this shattered marriage crumble, or step deeper into the mystery, into her world. I took a deep breath. "Then let's fix this," I said. Emily's eyes widened. "What? You said they're coming for him? Then let's make sure they don't." A slow, uncertain smile crossed her lips. "You'd do that? For him?" "No. For you? Always." Maybe the fortress had crumbled. But some things were worth rebuilding. And this story, Wasn't over yet. Would you like a continuation? The deeper I dug, the more dangerous the truth became. A deal with the devil Nathan was in deeper than I thought, 100 grand deep. To the kind of people who didn't send collection letters, they sent bodies. I met him the next night at a bar on the outskirts of town. He was younger than me, maybe late 20s, with the same piercing blue eyes as Emily. His fingers drummed anxiously on the table as I sat down. "So," I said, "tell me everything." Nathan glanced at Emily, then back at me. He hesitated, then exhaled. "I made a mistake." "Yeah, no kidding. I borrowed money from a guy named Roman Caruso." The name hit me like a hammer. Caruso wasn't just a loan shark. He was a ghost, a legend whispered about in dark corners, a man whose debts were repaid in blood. Emily tensed beside me. "Nathan, you idiot." I know, he muttered. "But I didn't think it would go this far. I was desperate. I just wanted to start over." "Start over?" I asked. Nathan rubbed his face. "I lost my job last year. Got mixed up in gambling. Thought I could turn things around, make some quick cash. It spiraled. And now," he swallowed hard. "Caruso's people took Sarah, the blonde girl." Nathan nodded. "She's my girlfriend. They grabbed her yesterday. They're holding her until I pay." My jaw clenched. "Do you have the money?" Nathan gave a humorless laugh. "Do I look like I have 100 grand? A dangerous plan. I should have walked away. I should have left Nathan to clean up his own mess." But Emily's eyes pleaded with me. And despite everything, the lies, the secrets, I still loved her. "I'll get her back," I said. Nathan stared. "You don't even know these people." "No," I admitted. "But I know how to play a game." Caruso was smart. He'd never take a check. If we wanted Sarah back, we had to outplay him. The meeting 2 nights later, I stood in a dimly lit warehouse, the air thick with gasoline and bad intentions. Across from me, Roman Caruso leaned against a black Mercedes, a smirk on his scarred face. "You must be Jake," he said. "And you must be the guy who doesn't know when to quit." A few of his men tensed, but Caruso only chuckled. "Brave," he said. "Stupid, but brave. So you're here for the girl?" "I'm here to make a deal." Caruso's grin widened. "Nathan owes me, and in my world, debts don't just disappear." "I'm not asking you to make them disappear." I reached into my pocket and pulled out a flash drive. "I'm offering you something better." Caruso raised an eyebrow. "This," I continued, "is every dirty cop, judge, and politician you have on your payroll, names, transactions, bank accounts. You could burn half the city with this." Caruso's expression darkened. "You're bluffing." I tossed the drive onto the hood of his car. "Try me." A long silence stretched between us. Then Caruso gestured to one of his men. The thug disappeared into the warehouse, returning minutes later with Sarah, shaken but unharmed. "You just bought her life," Caruso said. "But Nathan's debt isn't gone. If I don't get my money next time, I'm taking a piece of him." "Understood," I said. We left without another word. The aftermath, Nathan and Sarah fled the city that night. Emily and I watched them go from our front porch, the weight of everything between us unspoken. "So," she said after a long silence, "what now?" I exhaled. "I don't know." Emily bit her lip. "Do we still have a chance?" I looked at her, the woman I had loved, the woman who had lied to me, the woman I had just risked my life for. "I don't know that either," I admitted. The fortress of our marriage had crumbled. Whether we could rebuild it? That was a mystery yet to be solved. The end? Or maybe just the beginning? Want a sequel? Trust is like glass. Once broken, it never quite looks the same again. The distance between us, for the next few weeks, Emily and I lived in the same house but in different worlds. She tried. She made my coffee in the mornings, asked about my day. But there was something hollow in it, a carefulness like she was afraid of setting off a landmine. I was afraid of the same thing. At night, I'd lie awake, staring at the ceiling, wondering when everything had started to unravel. Was it when she found Nathan? When she started lying? Or had the cracks always been there, waiting for the right pressure to break them open? One night, as I was pouring a glass of whiskey, she spoke from behind me. "Do you regret it?" I turned. Regret what? Helping Nathan, getting involved in all of this. I took a slow sip, considering my answer. "No," I said finally. "But I regret not knowing the truth sooner." Emily's eyes darkened. "I was trying to protect you." I let out a bitter chuckle. "You were trying to protect yourself." She didn't deny it. A warning. The next morning, I found something that made my blood run cold. A single white envelope slipped under our front door. Inside was a Polaroid, a picture of Emily, taken the night before, through our bedroom window. No note. No threats, just the image. A silent promise that someone had been watching. "Jake?" Emily's voice was soft as she came up behind me. "What's wrong?" I turned the picture so she could see. Her breath hitched. Who would?" I already had a guess. Roman Caruso. I'd thought the deal was done, that we'd bought our way out. But people like Caruso didn't just let things go. "Pack a bag," I told Emily. "We're leaving." The chase we drove for hours, away from the city, towards nowhere in particular. I kept checking the rearview mirror, half expecting to see black SUVs tailing us. But the roads were empty. Too empty. "Jake, we can't run forever," Emily said. "We're not running forever. Just long enough to figure out what Caruso wants." I pulled into a roadside motel, the kind where nobody asked questions. We checked in, under fake names. Emily sat on the edge of the bed, hands gripping the sheets. "Do you think Nathan—" "No," I said. "Nathan's long gone. This is about us now." A sharp knock on the door made us both freeze. I reached for the gun I'd brought. One I hadn't told Emily about. Slowly, I stepped toward the door. "Who is it?" Silence. Then, a voice. "Jake, open up. We need to talk." I knew that voice. Nathan. Buried secrets. Nathan looked worse than when I'd last seen him. Dark circles under his eyes, a cut on his cheek. He shoved his way inside, shutting the door behind him. "You shouldn't be here," I said. "Neither should you," he shot back. "Caruso isn't done with you, Jake. He never was." Emily stood, her face pale. "Nathan, what's going on?" He rubbed a hand over his face. I lied. My stomach twisted. "About what?" Nathan exhaled. "About the money. About Caruso." He met my eyes. "The truth is, it's not my debt. It's yours." The room tilted. "What the hell are you talking about?" I demanded. Nathan swallowed. "Caruso doesn't just loan money. He collects favors. And a long time ago, before you even met Emily, you did something for him. Something he never forgot." Memories crashed over me. A past I had buried deep. A job I had taken when I was desperate. A name, a body. My pulse pounded. "That was years ago." Nathan's voice was grim. "It doesn't matter. Caruso doesn't forget. He was always coming for you, Jake. I was just the excuse to bring you back. In." The Polaroid. The warning. I hadn't saved Nathan. I'd walked right into a trap. The end, or the beginning of the real game. Sometimes the past isn't just a ghost. It's a hunter, and it never stops chasing you. The job I couldn't outrun. I couldn't breathe. Caruso had been after me all along. No, that didn't make sense. I had done one job for him years ago, back when I was drowning in debt, desperate to survive. A single night. A single task. I buried it, moved on, rebuilt my life. And now here it was, digging itself out of the grave. "Nathan," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. What exactly did Caruso tell you? Nathan ran a hand through his hair, pacing the motel room. He said you owed him something, that he'd use me to get to you. I didn't understand at first, but when he let Sarah go, I knew. This was never about me. I was just the bait. Emily looked between us, her face pale. Jake, what did you do? I swallowed hard. I pulled a trigger. Silence. Nathan's eyes widened. Emily's breath hitched. You... She started, but I cut her off. I didn't know who he was. Caruso gave me a name, an address, told me the guy was a problem, and if I made it go away, I'd be set for life. I was desperate, Emily. I was drowning in debt. I wasn't thinking straight. My fists clenched. So I did it. I went to that house, I pulled the trigger, and I never looked back. Nathan exhaled sharply. And now, Caruso wants his debt repaid. A dead man's revenge. For a moment, nobody spoke. The walls of that cheap motel room felt like they were closing in. Emily stood slowly, crossing her arms. So what now? Caruso wants Jake dead? Nathan hesitated. No, he wants something worse. Worse than death? I asked, my voice cold. Nathan nodded. He wants you to work for him, permanently. He doesn't just need a debt repaid, Jake. He wants to own you. I let out a sharp laugh, bitter and humorless. That's never going to happen. Nathan's face darkened. Then we need a plan, because Caruso doesn't take no for an answer. The first strike. We left the motel before dawn. I knew Caruso wouldn't wait long before making his move. The Polaroid was just the first warning. The next would be bloodier. We drove in silence, heading to the one place I swore I'd never return, a storage facility on the outskirts of town, Unit 117. Inside, beneath layers of dust and forgotten years, was a box, locked, untouched since the night I walked away from my past. Inside that box was everything I needed to destroy Caruso. Bank accounts, blackmail material, the names of men who worked for him, who feared him, who wanted him dead. Emily stood at the doorway, arms wrapped around herself. Jake, what is this? I stared down at the box. It's the only way I walk away from this alive. The trap Caruso was smart. He knew. I'd come for him. He was waiting for it. The moment I stepped into his club that night, I felt it. Eyes on me. Trap set. The tension in the air thick and suffocating. Roman Caruso sat at the VIP section, sipping whiskey, watching me like a lion watches a wounded animal. Jake, he said smoothly, gesturing for me to sit. I was wondering when you'd show. I didn't sit. You made your point, Roman, I said. But you forgot something. He raised an eyebrow. I don't owe you anything anymore. I tossed a folder onto the table. Caruso flipped it open. His smirk faltered. Inside were documents, accounts tying him to men in high places, evidence of payments, of bribes, of bodies buried where they shouldn't be, a kill list with his name on it, written by the very people who pretended to be his allies. I know every crack in your empire, I said. And if you come after me, Emily, or Nathan again, this all goes public. Caruso exhaled through his nose, tapping a finger against the folder. Then, after a long moment, he chuckled. Smart, he admitted. I always knew you had it in you. Then his eyes hardened. But are you sure you want to play this game with me? I didn't flinch. I'm not playing, Roman. I'm ending it. A long silence. Then finally he closed the folder, leaned back, and grinned. Fine, he said. You win this round, Jake, but you better pray there isn't another. I turned, walking out without another word. The aftermath. That night, Emily and I sat on the porch, watching the sun rise over the empty street. Is it over? She asked softly. I exhaled. For now. She was quiet for a long moment. Then, Jake, can we fix this? I turned to her, really looking at her for the first time in weeks. The woman I had loved. The woman who had lied to me. The woman I had just risked my life for. I didn't know the answer. But maybe, just maybe, we could try. The end. Or was it? Want a final epilogue? Or a new twist? Just when you think you've escaped the past, it finds a way to drag you back in. One last message. I should have known it wasn't over. The deal with Caruso should have been the end of it. I had the leverage, the threats, the upper hand. And yet, when I walked into my house 2 nights later, I found a small white envelope waiting on the kitchen counter. No return address. No fingerprints. Just my name, handwritten in perfect looping script. I hesitated before opening it. A deep, sinking feeling settled in my gut. Inside was a single note. You missed something. R. I stared at the letter, my pulse hammering. Missed something? That's when I saw it. Tucked beneath the note was another Polaroid. Not of Emily, not of Nathan. It was a picture of a grave. Freshly dug. My name on the headstone. A chill ran down my spine. Caruso wasn't done with me. Not even close. The setup. I didn't tell Emily about the letter. She had been trying to rebuild, trying to believe we had a future again. I wasn't about to rip that away from her. Not yet. Instead, I went to the only person I knew who might have answers. Nathan. I found him in a rundown bar on the edge of town, nursing a whiskey like it was his last drink. He looked up when I sat. Across from him, eyes wary. Jake. Didn't think I'd see you again. We have a problem. I slid the Polaroid and letter across the table. Nathan frowned as he read it. Shit. Yeah. He let out a slow breath. Caruso's not the type to bluff. If he says you missed something, you did. Then what the hell is it? Nathan hesitated, running a hand through his hair. Jake, what exactly did you do for Caruso all those years ago? I told you. A job. One night. One body. And you never looked into who it was? I stared at him. It didn't matter. Nathan gave a humorless laugh. See? That's the thing about Caruso. He doesn't just kill random people. If you were his trigger man, you took out someone important. A sick feeling crawled into my stomach. You think this is revenge? Nathan exhaled. I think whoever you killed. Their story isn't finished yet. The ghost. From the past, I spent the next 3 days digging into my own past, something I had never dared to do before. The man I had killed had a name. Vincent Morelli. The moment I saw it, everything clicked. Morelli wasn't just some nobody. He had been connected. A rising star in the criminal world, with ties to people even Caruso feared. His death had been quick, silent, written off as an unsolved mystery. Until now. Because as I dug further, I found something else. Vincent Morelli had a brother, and he wasn't just alive. He had been waiting for me. The real enemy. His name was Luca Morelli, a ghost. A shadow. A man who had disappeared from the grid years ago, only to resurface with one goal, vengeance. And now, thanks to Caruso, he knew exactly where to find me. I sat in my car outside an abandoned warehouse, gripping the steering wheel. Wasn't just being watched, I was being hunted. A knock on my window made me jump. Nathan, tell me you have a plan, he said. I swallowed. Yeah. Good. He glanced around. Because you've got company. I followed his gaze to the rearview mirror. A black SUV was parked across the street. The driver was watching us. Luca Morelli had arrived, and this time, there would be no escape. To be continued? Would you like to continue? This could go in a few different directions. A full confrontation with Luca Morelli. A shocking betrayal from someone unexpected. A hidden truth about Emily that changes everything. Your call. What happens next? You don't outrun ghosts. You just hope they don't catch you in the dark. The warning shot. The SUV's engine rumbled, low and steady. Whoever was inside wanted me to know they were watching. Nathan leaned in. "Jake, we need to move." "No." I kept my eyes on the SUV. "They're not here to kill me, not yet." "And you're just going to sit here and wait for an invitation?" "Maybe." Because Luca Morelli was smart. If he wanted me dead, I wouldn't have seen it coming. No. This was a message. A warning. He was telling me he had eyes on me. And when he was ready, he'd strike. The meeting. That night, I got the real invitation. A text. Unknown number, Warehouse District, Pier 9, midnight. Come alone. I showed Nathan. It's a trap. Of course it's a trap. Then why the hell are we going? Because I need to know what he wants. Nathan exhaled sharply, running a hand through his hair. Fine, but we do this my way. I raised an eyebrow. You don't do a damn thing alone, Jake. You go in, I watch from a distance. You so much as blink wrong, I'm pulling you out. I nodded. It was the best deal I was going to get. The ghost in the shadows. The air smelled like salt and rust at the pier. The water lapped quietly against the docks, thick fog rolling in from the bay. I stood under a flickering street lamp, hands in my pockets, waiting. Then, footsteps. Slow. Measured. Out of the darkness, Luca Morelli emerged. Tall. Lean. Dressed. In a tailored black coat, dark stubble lining his sharp jaw. His eyes. Cold, calculating, full of hate. He stopped a few feet away. Jake Carter. His voice was smooth, like he was tasting my name. I've been waiting a long time for this. That makes two of us, I said, a ghost of a smile. Do you know who I am? I do now. Good. He took a step closer. Then you know why we're here. I killed your brother. Luca's jaw tensed. You did. It was a job. Maybe for you. For me, it was a death sentence. His voice darkened. When you pulled that trigger, you didn't just take Vincent. You destroyed me. I said nothing. There was nothing to say. I lost everything, Jake. My family. My place in this world. I spent years hiding, running, but not anymore. I'm back, and I'm here to take back what's mine. Which is? Luca's smile was slow. Everything. The proposition I expected threats, promises of pain, maybe a bullet to the head. But what Luca said next, I never saw it coming. I don't want to kill you, Jake. That threw me. Could have fooled me. No. He stepped closer, voice lowering. I want you to work for me. I stiffened. You took my brother. You stole my life. Now you're going to help me take Caruso's. The impossible choice. I stared at him, waiting for the punchline. You're insane. Am I? Luca tilted his head. Think about it. Caruso used you, Jake. He owns you. You think this is over just because you threw some blackmail in his face? He leaned in. Caruso is waiting for you to slip up, and when you do, he'll bury you. And you think you're a better option? Luca's smile was razor sharp. I think I'm the only option. I swallowed hard, because the worst part? I wasn't sure he was wrong. The crossroads Luca Morelli wanted revenge, and he wanted me to help him get it. If I said no, he'd kill me. Eventually, if I said yes, I'd be throwing myself into a war with Roman Caruso. Either way, I wasn't walking away clean. I took a slow breath, meeting Luca's gaze. If I do this... I paused. What happens when Caruso's gone? Luca smirked. Then we see who's left standing. In this game, trust is a weapon, and the wrong move, it gets you buried. The deal with the devil. Luca Morelli was giving me a choice. Help him destroy Roman Caruso, the man who had once owned me, or refuse and end up in a shallow grave next to his brother. Either way, I was a dead man walking. But the thing about dying? I wasn't planning on going alone. I exhaled slowly, meeting Luca's gaze. I'll do it. His smirk was small but satisfied. Good. But I don't work for you. Luca chuckled. Of course not. We both knew that was a lie. The setup Nathan was waiting in the car when I got back. So? He asked. I gripped the steering wheel. We're going after Caruso. Nathan let out a low whistle. Jesus, just when I thought you couldn't get any dumber. I didn't have a choice, Nate. You always have a choice. I clenched my jaw. Not this time. Silence. Then Nathan sighed. All right, what's the play? The first move Luca's plan was simple. Caruso had weaknesses, hidden accounts, men who were more loyal to money than blood. If we hit him where it hurt, we could dismantle his empire, piece by piece. Caruso doesn't trust easily, Luca told me, pouring a drink in his penthouse suite. But you? He thinks you're still afraid of him. He's wrong. Maybe. But we'll use that. You're going to go back to him, Jake. Tell him you want back in. I tensed. You think he'll buy that? Luca smirked. He will when you hand him this. He tossed a flash drive onto the table. What's on it? Enough to make him think you're betraying me. I stared at the drive. This was dangerous, suicidal, but I didn't have a choice. The return to the Lions' Den Caruso's club was just as I remembered, loud, pulsing with music, filled with men who would slit your throat for looking at them wrong. I walked through the doors, heart hammering. Every instinct screamed that I was making a mistake. Then I saw him, Roman Caruso, sitting in his VIP booth, sipping whiskey, watching me like a predator sizing up prey. I approached slowly, his lips curled into a smirk. Jake Carter, back from the dead. I slid into the seat across from him. I need to talk. Caruso studied me for a long moment. Then he gestured for his men to leave. Talk. I placed the flash drive on the table. Luca Morelli thinks I'm working for him. Caruso's smirk faded. He picked up the drive, weighing it in his palm. And why would you bring this to me? I leaned forward. Because I want him dead just as much as you do. The lie that could kill me, Caruso, was silent, watching me. I forced myself to hold his gaze. This was the moment. If he bought it, I'd be one step closer to tearing him down. If he didn't, I'd be dead before I left the club. Finally, Caruso chuckled. You always were full of surprises, Jake. He swirled his whiskey. Fine. You want in? You prove yourself first. I exhaled slowly. What do you need? Caruso's smirk turned razor sharp. Luca Morelli has a rat in my organization. I want you to find them, and I want you to kill them. The trap eye left the club with my pulse hammering. This was bad. If I killed the rat, I'd prove my loyalty to Caruso, but betray Luca in the process. If I didn't, Caruso would know I was playing him. I was stuck between two men who wouldn't hesitate to put a bullet in me. I needed a way out, and then just as I was about to get in my car, my phone buzzed. Unknown. Number. Check your trunk. My stomach twisted. I turned slowly, heart pounding, popped the trunk, and froze. A body, eyes staring lifelessly. Blood soaking through a crisp white shirt, and in the dead man's hand, a note. You're running out of time. E! I staggered back. No, this wasn't Luca, or Caruso. This was someone else. Someone who had been watching from the very beginning. Emily, to be continued. The dead don't talk, but sometimes they leave messages. The body in the trunk. My fingers trembled as I reached for the note. You're running out of time. Emily. What the hell was she playing at? I forced myself to look at the corpse again. The face was bruised, lips slightly parted, a gunshot wound in the center of the chest. Then my stomach dropped. I knew this man. His name was Marco DeLucci. He worked for Caruso, one of his lower-level guys, but still trusted enough to be in the inner circle. The kind of guy who knew things, and now he was dead. In my trunk. Someone was setting me up. I slammed the trunk shut, my mind racing. I needed answers, and there was only one person who could give them to me, Emily. The confrontation, I drove fast, reckless. By the time I reached Emily's apartment, my pulse was hammering. I pounded on the door. No answer. I tried again. Harder. Still nothing. My gut. Twisted. She's not here. Then I saw it. Through the window. A faint glow from her laptop, left open on the coffee table. I glanced around, then forced the door open with my shoulder. Inside, the air was thick with perfume. The kind Emily only wore when she was nervous. I moved to the laptop. The screen showed an email, one she had been typing before she left. Draft. Jake, if you're reading this, I don't know if I'll be alive by the time you find me. I didn't mean for it to go this far, but there are things you don't know. Things I couldn't tell you. Meet me at the old train station, midnight, no one else. My stomach clenched. She was scared. And worse. She was running. But from who? The race against time. I checked my watch. 11:45 p.m. I had 15 minutes to get to her. I grabbed my gun and ran. The old train station had been abandoned for years. A relic of the past, covered in graffiti and forgotten memories. I parked a block away and moved in cautiously. The air smelled like rust and rain. My footsteps echoed as I stepped onto the platform. Then I saw her. Emily. Standing near the edge, arms wrapped around herself, eyes darting through the shadows. "Emily!" I called out. She turned sharply, eyes wide. "Jake!" A gunshot. I hit the ground as the bullet whizzed past me, slamming into the metal pole behind me. Emily screamed, "Sniper! Someone was here to kill us!" The ambush eye grabbed Emily and pulled her behind cover as more bullets ripped through the night. "Who the hell is shooting at us?" I demanded. Emily was shaking. "It's Caruso! He found out!" "Found out what, Emily?" Her eyes locked onto mine, and that's when she said the words that changed everything. I was the rat. The world tilted. What? Tears welled in her eyes. "I was feeding information to Luca. I thought I could protect you. But Caruso knows now. And he's not going to stop until we're both dead." The truth hit me like a freight train. Caruso had ordered me to find the rat. And now I had. But it was Emily. And if I didn't kill her, Caruso would know I was playing both sides. I had one choice. I raised my gun, aimed it at her. Emily flinched. "Jake." I pulled the trigger. To be continued. There are choices you can live with, and then there are the ones that haunt you. The shot that wasn't. I pulled the trigger. The gun roared in the empty train station. Emily gasped, stumbling back, her hands clutching her chest. For a second, I thought I'd done it. Then she looked down. No blood. Because I hadn't shot her. The bullet had ripped past her, slamming into the rusted metal beam behind her. A warning shot. A lie. If Caruso's sniper was watching, they'd believe she was dead. At least that was the hope. Emily's breath hitched. "Jake!" "Run," I said. Her lips parted like she wanted to argue. Like she wanted to stay. But then, more gunfire. Bullets slammed into the concrete around us, ricocheting off metal. The sniper wasn't convinced. Emily hesitated. I grabbed her by the wrist. "I said run!" She turned and bolted, disappearing into the shadows. I stayed behind. I had to sell the act, had to make it real. I stepped out from behind cover, arms raised. "She's dead!" I shouted into the night. "It's done!" Silence. Then, a single response. A man's voice, cold and steady. "We'll see about that." The sniper wasn't working alone. Someone was here, and they were coming for me. The hunter in the dark eye backed away slowly, eyes scanning the shadows, footsteps, slow, measured. Then he stepped into the dim glow of a street lamp, tall, scarred, a buzz cut that made him look military, a gun in his hand, but he wasn't aiming it. Not yet. He smiled. Jake Carter. I was hoping. I'd get to meet you. I didn't know his name. Didn't need to. Everything about him screamed Caruso's enforcer. Caruso sent you? I asked, playing for time. Not exactly. Let's just say, I have my own reasons for being here. He tilted his head, studying me. You didn't kill her, did you? I kept my face blank. She's dead. He let out a small, amused breath. That's what you want me to believe. My grip on my gun tightened. What do you want? I asked. Oh, it's simple, really. His smile widened. Caruso's getting impatient. He wants proof that you're on his side, and I'm here to deliver it. My blood ran cold. Meaning I'm going to take you back to him. He took another step, closer. Alive if possible, in pieces if necessary. The standoff, the enforcer took another step, then another. I needed to act. Fast. I could run, but I wouldn't make it far. I could fight. But he was bigger, stronger, more prepared. Then again, I wasn't exactly helpless. My fingers brushed against the small knife hidden in my jacket sleeve. One move. One chance. The enforcer's eyes flicked to my hand. Don't be stupid, Jake. I smiled. Too late. And then I struck. Some fights are won with fists. Others, with secrets. The first strike. I moved fast. The enforcer expected me to pull my gun. Instead, I went for the knife. A quick flick of my wrist, and steel flashed in the dim light. I aimed for his ribs. A quick, clean stab. But he was faster. He twisted, sidestepping just enough to avoid the blade sinking deep. Instead, I grazed his side. Enough to draw blood, but not enough to stop him. Shit. Before I could pull back, he slammed a fist into my gut. The air rushed out of my lungs. Pain exploded in my ribs. I staggered. And that was all he needed. The tables turned. The enforcer grabbed me by the collar and slammed me against the rusted metal pillar. You're quick, he admitted, voice calm. But not quick enough. I gasped for breath. My knife slipped from my fingers, clattering to the ground. He pressed his gun under my chin. Now, tell me the truth. His voice was almost amused. Did you really kill Emily? I kept my face blank. Yeah, he smiled. Liar. His finger tightened on the trigger. Then, bang! But it wasn't his gun. The shadow in the dark. The enforcer staggered forward, his grip loosening. Blood bloomed across his shoulder. Someone had shot him. I shoved him off me as he cursed, spinning, toward the direction of the shot. That's when I saw her. Emily, standing at the edge of the train platform, a gun in her shaking hands. Jake, move! She yelled. The enforcer turned, raising his weapon. Emily fired again. This time, she didn't miss. The bullet struck him in the leg. He went down hard, cursing as he hit the concrete. I didn't wait. I grabbed my knife from the ground, lunged forward, and pressed it to his throat. Who the hell are you? I growled. Blood dripped from his lips as he let out a low chuckle. You should be asking the real question, Jake. His grin was wild now. Who do you really think Emily is? My pulse pounded. What are you talking about? His smile widened. You think she's on your side? That she's just some girl who got caught in the crossfire? He laughed, even as blood spilled onto the concrete. Ask her what she's really been doing behind your back. I turned to Emily. She was pale, gripping the gun with white-knuckled hands. Emily, I said slowly. Tell me he's lying. Silence. Then, Jake, I didn't want you to find out this way. My stomach dropped. Some lies are easier to live with. Others? They destroy you from the inside out. The truth unveiled. I didn't know if I was ready for the answer. but I needed to hear it. "Tell me," I whispered, my voice low, almost pleading. Emily hesitated, her gun lowering just slightly. Her gaze flickered between me and the enforcer, still struggling on the ground. Finally, she spoke. "Jake, I didn't start this to hurt you, but I've been working with Caruso." The words landed like a punch to my gut. "What?" I choked out. Her eyes were filled with regret. "Not like you think, though. I didn't want to, but I had no choice. I was trying to protect you." "Protect me?" I laughed bitterly. "By betraying me? By working with the guy who's been tearing our lives apart?" She winced, but stood her ground. "I had to. I was trying to buy us time, trying to stop him from going. After you. I was hoping it would all end before you found out." The enforcer groaned behind me, and I shifted my focus back to him. He was still alive, but barely. "But what exactly were you doing for Caruso?" I demanded. She swallowed, eyes darting to the fallen man. "I've been gathering intel, Jake. On you. On Luca. On everyone." She looked down, almost ashamed. "I was Caruso's spy." I shook my head, unable to process the weight of her words. You betrayed me. You put me in the middle of this. You lied to me. All of it, Emily. Everything. I didn't know what to say. Anger surged in my chest. Confusion. Betrayal. She stepped forward, a single tear rolling down her cheek. "Jake, please. You have to believe me. I never wanted to hurt you. I just... Bang! The final shot. The shot rang out, echoing through the train station. Emily's body jerked back. Her eyes went wide with shock. I watched as she crumpled to the ground. The enforcer. He had the last laugh. I rushed to her side, kneeling down in a panic. "No! No! No! No!" Blood poured from her chest. "Emily!" I shouted, shaking her shoulders. Her breaths were shallow, her face pale. She looked up at me, her hand reaching weakly. "For mine, Jake. I didn't want to hurt you." Her voice was a whisper, fading fast. I gripped her hand tighter, tears stinging my eyes. "Please don't do this. Please." She smiled faintly, her grip weakening. "I'm sorry." And with that, her eyes closed. She was gone. The aftermath, I sat there for a long time, cradling Emily's lifeless body in my arms. The silence was deafening. The enforcer was gone, or at least incapacitated, probably by the bullet Emily had fired, before collapsing. I didn't care. He was nothing now. But Emily. She was everything. And now, she was gone. The weight of the betrayal settled over me, thick and suffocating. I couldn't even feel the cold of the night air anymore. My world had crumbled in a matter of moments. What had she really been trying to do? What did she think she was saving me from? And what would I do now? I had no answers. Just emptiness. When everything you trust shatters, what's left to hold on to? The cold road. Ahead, I left her there. I couldn't bear to look at her anymore. The woman I loved, the woman who had betrayed me, the woman who had just died in my arms. I had nothing left to say. No words that could undo the devastation, the lies, the pain. I didn't even bother to check if the enforcer was still alive. I didn't care. What mattered now was what came next. I wiped the blood from my hands, feeling as though I were washing away the last of my humanity. This wasn't who I was. This wasn't the life I'd built. I didn't ask for any of this, but now I had a choice, to end it all or to keep going. The choice. The next morning, I sat in my car, staring at the old, crumpled map that Emily had left behind. She had been trying to save me, trying to give me a way out. She'd been caught in the crossfire of something much larger than us, something she couldn't control. But in the end, she paid the price for her choices. Caruso. Luca. I knew who the real enemy was, and it was time I put an end to it. But first, I needed answers. The investigation. I spent days tracking down every lead Emily had left behind. Her emails, encrypted messages, scattered notes. There was something I was missing. Caruso wasn't just some mob boss. He was bigger, more connected. There was a web of influence that reached beyond just the criminal underworld. Emily had been onto something, but she hadn't had the chance to finish what she started. One note, scrawled hastily on a torn piece of paper, caught my eye. The key to it all is in the files. The ones Luca hid. The ones Caruso is after. Find them. Files? I didn't know what she meant at first. But then something clicked. Emily had been close. Too close. And those files? They were the heart of everything. The leverage, the truth, the power. If I could find them, I could bring everything crashing down. The hunt for the files, I tracked down every shady contact Emily had. I dug through every old hideout, every warehouse she had ever visited. I even risked walking into Caruso's territory, all while pretending to be just another loyal soldier. But I was too good. Caruso had no idea what was coming. It wasn't long before I found them, hidden deep in the files of a corrupted government. Official. The files. They weren't just about money or power. They were about secrets. The kind of secrets that could tear down nations. And Caruso wanted them, but I was going to take them for myself. The moment of truth. I stood in front of the vault that housed the files. I had no idea what kind of danger I was about to unleash, but it didn't matter. I had already lost everything. The past, the future. Everything felt like a distant memory. I was no longer Jake Carter. I was something else now, someone with nothing left to lose. I punched in the code. The vault clicked. Open. Inside, the files were arranged in neat stacks. They smelled like dust and betrayal. I took a deep breath, knowing that opening them would be the point of no return. But I had to. I flipped open the first folder. It was a list. A list of names. And behind every name was a number. A monetary figure. I went through the list one by one until one name caught my eye. Emily Carter. Her name was on the list. Not as my wife, not as the woman I loved, but as someone else's pawn. Though, shocking revelation, the document spelled out everything. Emily had been an asset, not just a spy. She had been paid off by Caruso before we met. But it wasn't just about money. Emily had been a part of something even darker than I had ever imagined. Caruso hadn't been the only one pulling the strings. There was a bigger player in this game, a shadowy figure who was controlling everything from behind the scenes, someone who had ties to politicians, international organizations, and even the CIA. The files contained everything, all the evidence, and if I wanted to destroy Caruso once and for all, I needed to expose this, the final decision. But as I sat there, holding the evidence in my hands, I realized something. It wasn't just about taking down Caruso anymore. This was bigger than all of us, bigger than anything Emily and I had ever signed up for. And in that moment, I had to decide, do I burn it all down, expose the secrets and take down everyone involved, or do I use it as leverage? The truth could destroy me. Destroy everyone I had ever known. But there was no going back now. Power doesn't lie in what you know, but in what you're willing to do with it. The path to destruction. I stared down at the files, the weight of the decision pressing down on me like 1,000 pounds. Every name, every dollar, every secret written in black ink was a string attached to a puppet. And the strings led to people who had manipulated, betrayed, and destroyed everything in their path. If I exposed this, There would be no going back. Caruso, Luca, the mysterious puppet master behind all of this. They'd come for me, and everyone I knew, everyone I loved, would be dragged into the fire with me. But if I didn't, would I be any better than the people who had already ruined my life? Would I become the man I swore I would never be? The one who hides from the truth to protect himself? I couldn't do that. I couldn't live with that. So I made my decision. The power of leverage. I didn't go public with the files. That would have been too easy, too reckless. The game had changed, and I had to play it smarter. Instead, I did what I had learned from all those years of being involved with Caruso's world. I became the puppet master. I reached out to those who could make a difference, the few that had the power to make waves. I knew it wasn't just about the files. It was about making everyone believe I had something even bigger, something they couldn't ignore. I set up a meeting with Caruso's closest associates, Luca's people, the ones who thought they controlled everything. But this time, I was holding the strings. The negotiation. I arrived at the dimly lit conference room, the sound of my footsteps echoing in the silence. The men sitting around the table were familiar, cold faces, calculating eyes, their ties, pressed suits, the way they carried themselves like kings of a world that revolved around greed and blood. They didn't notice me as I walked in. They didn't even look up until I placed the folder on the table. I had them right where I wanted them. Luca's men exchanged glances, their faces narrowing. The tension in the room was palpable. "What's this?" one of them asked, his voice grating. "It's everything." I smiled, the first real smile I'd had in weeks. "You've been looking for these files, haven't you?" They froze. "What do you mean?" Another man spoke, his voice more controlled. I leaned forward, my gaze cold. "What if I told you that I have everything? Caruso, Luca, the hidden players, everything that's been going on behind your backs?" The silence stretched. Their eyes flicked between each other, calculating, strategizing. Finally, one of them spoke. "What do you want?" It was the question I'd been waiting for. I leaned back, letting the weight of the moment settle. "I want power. I want control. And I want you to back me. But more than that, I want to take down Caruso. He's been playing all of you just like he's played me." They didn't respond right away. But I knew I had them. The unpredictable turn. The meeting stretched on, but I could feel the tide turning. Every word I said, every piece of leverage I offered, chipped away at their resolve. I played on their fears, their ambitions, and their greed. But then, just as I thought I had won, everything changed. The door to the room burst open, and in walked someone I never expected to see. Emily. She was alive. And she wasn't alone. Behind her stood another figure, someone far more dangerous than any of these men combined, the real mastermind Caruso himself. I could hardly believe it. For all this time, I had thought I was pulling the strings, thinking I had control. But this was his game, and I had been a pawn all along. Emily's eyes met mine, but she didn't say a word. She just stood there beside Caruso, her face unreadable. Caruso smiled, a slow, deliberate smile. "Jake, I see you've been busy." I didn't know what to feel. Betrayal? Rage? Something worse? "How long?" I managed to ask. "How long have you been behind this?" Caruso stepped forward, the power he exuded radiating from every inch of his being. "Long enough to know that you were never in control, Jake." He looked at Emily, then back at me. "But you were useful. And now I think we can finally do what needs to be done." "What's that?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "Finish the game." The ultimate betrayal. Caruso's words hung in the air like a sentence. And then Emily spoke, her voice cold and distant. "You were a good soldier, Jake, but now you're a liability." My heart dropped. She wasn't just playing the part of his pawn, she had chosen him. The truth stung worse than the bullets that had once been aimed at me. But I wasn't done yet. I still had a trick left up my sleeve. As they stepped toward me, I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out the one thing I had kept hidden. The real trump card. I slammed it on the table. "The files, Caruso." His eyes flicked to the folder, his face a mask of confusion. But then, as he opened it, the smile that had been there vanished. The look in his eyes was one of pure rage. Caruso's face twisted with disbelief as he looked at the folder. His hand trembled slightly as he flipped through the pages. The man who had manipulated everything, who had been the puppet master, was now staring at the very strings that could unravel him. "This isn't possible," he muttered, scanning the documents. "How did you—" I didn't give him the chance to finish. "You weren't as untouchable as you thought," I said quietly, my voice steady now. The adrenaline that had surged in me the moment I walked into this room had shifted. I was calm now, too calm. I had come this far. There was no going back. I stood up, leaning over the table, making sure Caruso couldn't miss the fire in my eyes. "The files aren't just about your empire, Caruso. They're about you, your past, every dirty deal you've made, every life you've ruined. I have the proof to destroy you, and I'm not letting you walk out of here alive." The men around the table stood up, visibly nervous now, glancing between Caruso and me. But Caruso wasn't finished. His face hardened, and he slammed the folder down, standing up so fast his chair nearly toppled. "You think this is over? You think you can just walk in and take everything from me?" His voice was a growl, thick with rage. "You're nothing, Jake. You're just another pawn in this game." I felt a cold smile creep onto my lips. "You're wrong." The unexpected betrayal. As if on cue, Emily stepped forward. I couldn't read her. She wasn't the woman I once loved. She wasn't the woman who had fought beside me. She wasn't anything like I thought she was. Her eyes locked onto mine, but there was no warmth, no recognition in them. Just cold, calculated, indifference. "Jake, I warned you." Her voice was calm, too calm. I froze. "Warned me? What do you mean?" She gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod to Caruso. I didn't understand it at first. But then it hit me. I looked down at the files I had, just exposed to Caruso, the ones that were supposed to be the weapon I would use to destroy him. But now, with Emily's move, I realized the truth. The files weren't just about Caruso. They were about me, too. Emily had never been on my side. She wasn't even playing her own game. She was playing Caruso's. The silence in the room thickened, and the tension was suffocating. Caruso's lips curved into a satisfied smirk. "You've made your choice, Jake," Caruso said. "And you chose wrong. The final betrayal." Before I could react, Emily stepped up to Caruso and took the gun from his hand. She was calm, too composed for someone who had just shot me down in front of my eyes. She aimed the gun straight at me, and for a moment, I thought the world had stopped. I stared at her, the woman I had once trusted, the woman who had been in my arms, the woman who I thought would stand with me until the end. "You can't do this," I whispered, my heart pounding in my chest. Her expression didn't change. "You left me no choice, Jake." I didn't understand. I couldn't comprehend what was happening. She had been a spy for Caruso all along. But that wasn't all. She had been the key to everything. She had fed Caruso everything she knew about me, about my plans, about the people I trusted. All this time, I had been playing right into her hands. "I loved you," I said, my voice breaking. She didn't flinch. "No, you didn't. You never really knew me." She pulled the trigger, the shot that changed everything. The sound of the gunshot echoed in the room. But it wasn't me who fell. Caruso's eyes widened in shock as the bullet tore through his chest. He didn't even get the chance to look down at the blood spreading across his shirt. Emily stood there, the gun still smoking in her hand, the same cold expression on her face. She had just shot her own partner. And then, she looked at me. "You're not the only one who can play this game, Jake." Her voice was low, almost regretful. "I couldn't let him get away with this anymore. I had to destroy him before he destroyed everything I cared about." The realization hit me hard. Emily hadn't betrayed me because of some misplaced loyalty to Caruso. She had betrayed both of us. She had been playing the long game, waiting for the moment to take down the real mastermind, the man who had controlled her. Caruso fell to the floor, his life draining away. Emily stood over him, her face unreadable. "You have no idea how much I hated him," she whispered. "But I couldn't do it alone. I needed you, Jake. I needed you to give me the leverage to finish it." I stood frozen, staring at her, my heart in a state of complete disarray. The unexpected choice. As Caruso's body lay motionless on the floor, the room fell into silence. Everything had changed. The power dynamics, the allegiances, the people I thought I knew, and Emily. Emily was the wild card, the player I hadn't seen coming. I had to make a choice now. What do I do with the power I had gained? Do I take everything for myself and finish the game that Emily and I had started? In the aftermath of betrayal, there's only one thing left to do. Choose who you want to be. A new beginning or a bitter end. I stood there, looking at Emily, looking at Caruso's lifeless body. The silence in the room was suffocating, thick with the weight of everything that had just transpired. Emily was still holding the gun, her fingers lightly grazing the trigger. She was cold, calculating, something I hadn't expected. She had been my wife, my partner. But now she was something different, something darker. I didn't know what to think. Betrayal stung, but beneath that, there was something else, something I couldn't name. Was it relief, or was it fear? Fear of what Emily had become. Fear of what I had become. She broke the silence first. "You have a choice, Jake." Her voice was soft, almost tender, but there was no mistaking the underlying hardness beneath it. Swallowed, the taste of betrayal still lingering in my throat. "A choice?" She nodded, her gaze unwavering. "You can walk away, leave it all behind, forget everything, forget me. Or you can stay. You can take the power we've just gained and use it. Caruso is gone. His empire is crumbling. You could have everything you ever wanted. Everything I ever wanted." The words hung in the air like a tempting promise wrapped in poison. The temptation. I thought about it. The life we could build, the power we could wield together. I had seen it all, the crime, the lies, the deceit. But now I could be in control. I could take everything Caruso had built and turn it into my own empire. I could be the one who pulled the strings. I could be the one who made the rules. And with Emily by my side, we could rule together, just like we'd always dreamed, except this time, we wouldn't have to hide in the shadows. But was that really who I wanted to become? A man of power, control, and ruthless ambition? I'd seen firsthand how easily everything could collapse, how everything I'd trusted could turn to dust. I didn't want to be like them, the men who thought power was the only thing that mattered. The choice was mine. The final decision, I took a step back. The room felt colder now, as if the walls themselves were closing in. "I can't do this," I whispered. "I can't walk this path with you." I saw her face twitch slightly. It was the smallest flicker of emotion, but it was there, a flicker of hurt. "Jake," she said, her voice losing some of its steely composure. "You don't understand. We have a chance to change everything, to take control, to make everything we've been through mean something." I looked at her, and for the first time, I saw the desperation in her eyes. She wasn't just offering me power. She was offering me her. She was asking me to join her in this world, this dangerous, destructive world. But I had already seen the price of that. I had already lost too much. No, I said, my voice firm. I won't do it. I won't be a part of this anymore. The consequences, Emily didn't say anything for a long time. She just stood there, her grip on the gun tightening. And then she lowered it. "You're making a mistake," she said, her voice tinged with regret. "But I won't stop you." I could see the change in her. The mask she had worn, the one that had shielded her from the truth, was cracking. She wasn't the woman I had fallen in love with anymore. She was someone else entirely. But that wasn't my problem anymore. I turned away, walking toward the door. I couldn't look back. I couldn't. Because if I did, I would be giving in. A bitter farewell. As I walked out of the room, I didn't hear her footsteps behind me. She didn't follow, and I didn't look back. The streets outside were quiet. The city was still the same, but nothing felt the same to me anymore. I had just walked away from everything I had ever known. But in that moment, I realized something. It wasn't just about power. It was about who I was. I didn't want to be the man who destroys everything he touches. I didn't want to become someone I could never come back from. I wanted to walk away, for good. The choice I didn't make. In the days that followed, the world began to change. Emily took control, seizing the power I had refused. The empire Caruso had built didn't crumble. It simply shifted hands. But I wasn't part of it. I couldn't be. The files, the leverage, the game, they weren't mine anymore. They were hers. And the world went on. The shadows of betrayal and deception didn't fade, but they became just another part of the past, buried beneath the weight of the future. To be continued, but what comes next for Jake? Jake leaves everything behind and starts a new life, trying to find redemption. Emily's empire crumbles without Jake's help, and she falls from power. A new, unexpected threat emerges, forcing Jake to confront his past once again. In the silence of a life left behind, the echoes of our choices follow us, no matter how far we run. The quiet. After the storm, it's strange. How the world moves on while you stand still. I thought walking away from Emily, from everything that had become my life, would bring me peace. I thought the chaos of the past years would fade if I just stopped running after it. But peace was never waiting for me. I took a few weeks to clear my head, to get away from the city, from the noise. I went to a small town, away from the prying eyes and hidden dangers, to try to find the man I used to, or at least something that resembled him. But there were no answers there. No redemption. Only the heavy silence of a life half-lived. I spent my days walking through forests and staring at the ocean, trying to think of the life I could have had. I couldn't escape the feeling that everything I had known, everything I had loved, was over. I was no longer the man who dreamed of a future with Emily. I wasn't even the man who wanted to fix the wrongs of the past. I was just empty. The Cowlet was a late afternoon when my phone rang. I hadn't expected to hear from anyone. Emily, Caruso's people, they were all distant memories now, like ghosts I was trying to outrun. But the number on the screen wasn't one I recognized. I hesitated for a moment. The temptation to let it go was strong, but something pulled at me. I answered. "Jake?" The voice was smooth, calm, and far too familiar. It was Luca. "Luca," I said, my voice dry. "What do you want?" "We need to talk," Luca replied. There was no pleasantry in his voice, only urgency. "This is bigger than what you left behind. Caruso may be gone, but the fallout is just beginning. And we both know it." I gritted my teeth, the weight of his words sinking into my chest. I'd left that life, I didn't want to be pulled back in, but Luca wasn't someone you could ignore. What fallout? I asked, trying to sound calm despite the storm brewing inside me. You have no idea, do you? Emily is playing a dangerous game. Now, she thinks she can handle it, but she can't. A chill ran down my spine. What are you saying? Luca sighed on the other end. You think you've walked away clean, but everything you've done, everything you've been part of, none of. It stays buried for long. Emily's trying to control the empire Caruso built, but she's losing her grip. And the people who were once loyal to him, they're circling. They're ready to take her down. And you know what they're capable of. I felt a pit in my stomach. This wasn't just a warning. It was a threat. You think I'm going to help her? I asked, my voice dark. I don't care what you do, Luca said, the edge in his tone sharpening. But you need to understand something. If you don't act now, you'll both be dead. If Emily falls, they'll come after you next. You're part of the game whether you like it or not. You were always going to be the decision. The call ended abruptly. I stared at my phone, my heart racing. For a moment, I just stood there. Everything I'd worked to forget, to leave behind, was clawing its way back into my life. I could walk away again. I could vanish, go somewhere where no one could find me, where Emily's empire and the people who wanted to tear it down couldn't touch me. But something inside me snapped. The truth was, I never really walked away. I couldn't. I was tied to this world, to the choices I'd made, no matter how much I wanted to believe otherwise. If Emily was in trouble, and Luca's warning wasn't just a bluff, then I had to make a choice. I could let her fall, let her suffer the consequences of her decisions, or I could do something about it. And for the first time in weeks, I knew what I had to do. Reckoning I didn't tell anyone where I was going. I didn't need to. I headed back to the city, my mind racing with the consequences of my choices. The city had been my prison once. Now it felt like a battleground, one that I had been a part of, whether I wanted to be or not. Emily was still out there, trying to hold on to the empire she'd helped destroy. I didn't know if she was truly lost, or if she was still the same woman I'd loved. But I didn't have time to figure it out. I had to find her before it was too late. The unseen enemy, I met with Luca in a small, unmarked office in a corner of the city. It felt like a clandestine meeting, like old times. He didn't waste time. The people who are coming for Emily, they're not just thugs. They're organized. They know the inner workings of the business. And they're smart. Smarter than Caruso ever was. I could see the fear in Luca's eyes, and for the first time, I realized he wasn't trying to control me. He was trying to survive. Who are they? I asked. Luca's lips twisted into a grimace. It's not just one group. It's a network, a series of powerful figures who were beneath Caruso's radar, people who have been waiting for years for a chance to take everything. The past doesn't just haunt you, it chases you, forces you to confront the choices you've made and the ones still left to be made. The gathering storm. I didn't sleep that night. My mind kept replaying the conversation with Luca, the cold reality of everything that was about to unfold. I had walked away from the life I had known, but somehow it had found me again. Emily, Caruso's empire, the betrayals, the shadows that had followed me. None of it had really gone anywhere. It was just lying in wait, ready to rise again, but this time I couldn't be the man who ran away. I had been wrong before, so wrong. I couldn't keep pretending that I had no part to play in the chaos around me, and if Emily was still alive, still fighting to hold on to the fragments of the empire she had helped to destroy, I would have to face it. But it wasn't just about the empire anymore. It wasn't just about revenge, it was about survival. A fragile alliance, I didn't reach out to Emily right away. Instead, I met Luca at a quiet bar on the outskirts of the city. away from prying eyes. "You've made the right choice," Luca said when he saw me. His eyes were wary, like he wasn't entirely sure whether I would come back into the fold or if he'd just be left holding the pieces of a broken deal. "I didn't come here to make choices," I replied, my voice low. "I came here because I don't want to be a pawn anymore. I'm done letting others control the game." Luca gave me a sharp look, sizing me up. "That's what I wanted to hear." He slid a small folder across the table to me. "This is the intel we've gathered on the people after Emily. You'll need it if you're going to help her." I glanced down at the folder, my eyes scanning the contents. Names, locations, connections. The web of people involved in taking Emily down was vast, stretching farther than I could have imagined. "What makes you think I can help?" I asked. "You're talking about people who've been working in the shadows for years. I'm just one man." Luca's smile was thin. "One man is all it takes, especially when you're the one they didn't see coming." The silent warning, I didn't have time to digest Luca's words. There was no more waiting. Emily needed me, and every second I hesitated could be the difference between life and death. I left the bar and went straight to her. It took a while to find her. She had disappeared into the underworld, using the resources she had left to keep, herself hidden from the very people who had once been her allies. When I finally found her, she was alone, standing on the rooftop of an old building, staring out over the city. The wind blew through her hair, but there was no peace in her face. "You came back?" Emily said without turning around. I didn't say anything at first. I wasn't sure what to say. The woman standing in front of me wasn't the woman I had loved. She was a stranger, someone whose decisions had shaped the darkness we both now faced. "I didn't have a choice," I said finally. "Luca told me everything." She turned slowly, her eyes meeting mine. "So, you're going to help me now, after everything?" I stepped closer, my gaze unwavering. "I'm not doing it for you. I'm doing it because I don't want to end up dead. And I sure as hell don't want you to die either." Her lips curled into a sad, almost bitter smile. "I never asked for your help, Jake. I'm giving it anyway." Tensions rise. The first thing I did was check the information Luca had given me. It wasn't just about the men after her. It was about the larger conspiracy at play. Whoever was behind the move to take Emily. Down wasn't working alone. They were organized. They were a network of old power, ruthless and with resources that extended far beyond anything I had imagined. They had been building this up for years, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. And Emily, for all her ambition, was now caught, in the middle of it. I watched her as we moved through the shadowy streets of the city. She seemed so detached from everything, so cold, but I could see the cracks in her facade, the guilt that she tried to hide behind her eyes. "You know they're going to come after you, right?" I asked her. "There's no escaping this now." She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she kept walking, the sound of her boots echoing in the narrow alleyways. "I know, but I've already lost everything. What's left for me to lose?" I stopped walking, feeling the weight of her words settle around me. She had been right all along. She was never the naive girl I had once believed her to be. She had always known the price of the game. And now, the game was about to end. The game of power. That night, I met with Luca again. The plan was set. Emily would go underground, cut ties with everyone who could get her killed. But I knew she wouldn't stay hidden forever. The people who were hunting her wouldn't stop until they had her. Luca had a network of his own, contacts who could help, who could track the movement of those who wanted Emily gone. In the face of an impending storm, the strongest alliances are formed in the unlikeliest of places, the descent into darkness. The tension was palpable in the air, like the moment before a thunderstorm hits, heavy, thick, and suffocating. Emily had gone into hiding, but I knew it wasn't enough. The people hunting her weren't just going to sit back and wait for her to slip away. They were already moving, and we had to be quicker than them. I had spent years living in the shadows, pretending to be someone I wasn't. But now the game was different. There were no more tricks, no more false bravado. If Emily was going to survive, if I was going to survive, we had to play the game smart. But there was something about this game that felt different, more dangerous. I found myself questioning every move. Who could I trust? Who was still loyal to Emily? And who was simply waiting to stab us both in the back? A dark revelation. The plan was simple, or at least that's what I told myself. Find the people behind the plot, gather intel, and take them down before they could touch Emily. We had some of their names, but not enough to make a move. I sat in a dimly lit office, surrounded by the papers Luca had given me, staring at the web of names and connections. The more I looked at it, the more I realized how deep the rabbit hole went. These weren't just ordinary criminals, or even the remnants of Caruso's empire. They were players in a much larger game, people with resources, political ties, and the power to make us disappear without a trace. My phone buzzed, pulling me from my thoughts. It was Luca. "You need to come to me now," his voice crackled through the line. "Something's happened." I didn't ask questions. I grabbed my jacket and headed out the door, my heart pounding with the knowledge that whatever was coming, it wouldn't be good. The trap. When I arrived at Luca's hideout, the atmosphere was tense. The small room was littered with maps, pictures, and documents, a chaotic mess of plans that had once seemed like a way forward, but now felt like the blueprint for our destruction. Luca was pacing back and forth. He stopped when he saw me, his face pale. "It's worse than we thought," he said, his voice low and strained. "I've traced the people behind the plot. The network goes deeper than just criminals or power-hungry politicians. These people are tied to an international syndicate, one that has been operating in the shadows for decades." I felt the weight of his words sink in. "So, what now?" Luca handed me a file, more names, more faces, more connections. "You're not going to like this, but Emily, she's more than just a pawn in this game. She's the key." I glanced at him, confused. "What are you talking about?" "Emily's father," Luca continued. "Before he died, he made a deal with this syndicate. They've been using her to leverage control over the empire Caruso built. She's not just someone they want dead. She's someone they need alive, to control everything, and now they've found out that she's trying to take it all back." The revelation hit me like a punch to the gut. I had always known Emily was more than she appeared, but this was something I couldn't have predicted. Her father's connection to the syndicate explained a lot about why she had been so determined to take control. But it also made her a target in a way I hadn't imagined. "So what are we supposed to do now?" I asked, trying to push aside the flood of thoughts racing through my mind. "If they need her alive, why come after her?" Luca's eyes hardened. "Because they know she's a loose end. And they want to tie up all the loose ends before they can make their next move." The decision. I didn't sleep that night. I couldn't. My mind kept turning over the information, replaying it over and over again. Emily wasn't just fighting for survival anymore, she was fighting for something much bigger. She had inherited more than just Caruso's empire. She had inherited a dangerous legacy, one that had put a target on her back long before I ever walked back into her life. At dawn, I made my decision. I had no more room for hesitation. I couldn't stand on the sidelines anymore, watching her fight a battle that was beyond both of us. I went to find her. I didn't know if she would want my help, if she would even trust me after everything. But I couldn't let her face this, alone. When I found her, she was exactly where I thought she would be, in the one place where she felt safe, or at least where she thought she could hide. but the walls she'd built around herself were starting to crumble. She didn't look surprised to see me. In fact, she looked resigned, like she knew the day would come when I would be forced to face the truth. "You're back," she said, her voice cold but not unkind. "You didn't have to, you know." I stood in the doorway, my gaze steady on her. "I don't have a choice. Neither do you." She didn't argue. Instead, she simply nodded and motioned for me to come inside. In the darkest of nights, the choices we make can either save us or lead us into the deepest abyss. The storm breaks. The night we had been preparing for finally arrived, and the weight of it hung on every move. Emily and I were no longer just survivors. We were players in a dangerous game, one with stakes higher than we ever imagined. This wasn't just about taking down a syndicate. This was about the soul of an empire. As we moved under the cover of darkness, there was no turning back. Our plan was risky, perhaps the most dangerous thing we had ever attempted, but we were determined. Failure wasn't an option. Too many lives, too much had already been lost. We arrived at the heart of their operations, a sprawling, high-security compound tucked away on the outskirts of the city. The compound, once a symbol of power, now felt like a tomb. Inside, the syndicate's leaders were waiting, watching, ready to crush whatever resistance came their way. They thought we were weak, cornered, but they had underestimated the fire that still burned inside both Emily and me. "You know they'll expect us," I said, my voice barely above a whisper as we approached the compound's gates. "They'll be ready." Emily didn't flinch. She had lived her life in the shadows, and she had always been one step ahead of those who tried to control her. This wasn't just revenge for her, it was a reckoning. Let them wait. The inside job, our first move was to get inside. We used every contact, every piece of information we'd gathered to get past the guards. I had trained for moments like these, but this felt different. Every step, every breath felt like it was drawing us closer to something inevitable, something bigger than either of us. Once inside, we split up. Emily went one way, using her intelligence network to disable the security systems. I took the other, cutting through the building with precision. It was all going according to plan, until it wasn't. The first sign something had gone wrong was the sound of footsteps echoing down the corridor. I wasn't alone anymore. I barely had time to react before the doors burst open, and a squad of heavily armed guards stormed in. "You didn't think you were the only ones with resources, did you?" A voice sneered from the shadows. It was a man I recognized from the intel, a figure I'd been warned about but never truly understood. His name was Victor, a ruthless mercenary with ties to every corner of the criminal world, and he was the one pulling the strings. "You're too late," Victor said, stepping into the light. His eyes gleamed with a cold, calculating intent. "Emily Caruso was always going to be my pawn. You were foolish to think otherwise." I didn't answer. I couldn't. All I knew was that I had to keep moving, had to stay one step ahead. But Victor wasn't going to make it easy. The betrayal back at the compound. Emily was also facing an enemy she hadn't anticipated. As she disabled the final security measures, the room behind her door slid open. "You really thought you could control this, didn't you?" The voice came from behind her. She spun around, her hand already reaching for the weapon hidden beneath her jacket. But she froze when she saw the face. It was someone she knew, someone she trusted. "Luca," she whispered, disbelief written all over her face. Luca stood there, his face grim, his hand gripping a gun. "I never wanted this, Emily, but you forced my hand. The syndicate made an offer I couldn't refuse. You're too dangerous now. You have to be eliminated." The words hit like a physical blow. Emily took a step back, her mind reeling. Luca, her old ally, her friend, was the one who had betrayed her. She had trusted him, and now he was standing in front of her with a gun aimed directly at her chest. "Why, Luca?" she asked, voice shaky. Luca's expression softened, but only for a moment. "Because in this game there are no friends, only power. And you, Emily, are too much of a threat to them. To me." In that moment, everything shifted. Betrayal was a bitter pill to swallow, but it was a reality Emily had known existed. She had just hoped Luca wouldn't be the one to hand it to her. The final showdown back in the heart of the compound, I was fighting for my life, moving faster than I'd ever moved before. Victor's men were closing in on me, but I refused to back down. I had no choice but to keep fighting, to keep pushing forward. I heard the gunshots, loud, echoing, and my heart sank. Emily, I knew she was in trouble. I could feel it in my bones. I had to find her, but the halls seemed endless. Every turn I took, I found myself facing more enemies. Victor's men were everywhere, and they were closing in. My mind raced, trying to piece together a way out, but then out of nowhere, I heard a familiar voice, sharp, strong, determined. "Jake!" I turned just in time to see Emily emerge from the shadows, her eyes fierce with purpose. She was alive, and she was fighting back. In the ruins of everything once known, the road to redemption is paved with choices that will change the future forever. The silence. After the storm, the night was eerily quiet. The explosion had been a roaring crescendo, a final act of defiance against the syndicate's iron grip. But now, the world seemed still, as though everything had been reduced to ash, leaving only the remnants of what had once been. Emily and I stood in the distance, the smoldering wreckage of the compound stretching behind us. The fire still crackled in the night air, but it no longer felt like a victory. It felt like a rebirth, a moment of fragility between the chaos of the past and the uncertain future that loomed before us. She was still catching her breath, her face flushed with exhaustion, but her eyes were harder now, sharper. She had always been a survivor, but now she was something more. "Is it over?" Her voice was quiet, almost afraid to speak the words out loud, as if doing so would bring the storm back. I didn't answer immediately. The reality of our situation was still sinking in. "It's over, for now." I could see the doubt flicker in her eyes, and I knew she was thinking the same thing I was. How much longer would that now last? The weight of the world. The next few days were a blur. We moved quickly, gathering what little was left of our resources and making sure the syndicate's operation had been thoroughly destroyed. But even in the wreckage of what had once been their empire, new challenges arose. The fallout wasn't just about surviving the explosion. It was about what came after. Without the syndicate, without Caruso's empire, there was a void. A power vacuum that threatened to pull the city into a new kind of chaos. "We can't just walk away from this," Emily said one night as we stood looking over the city from a rooftop. The lights below seemed distant, like stars she could never reach. "If we leave it all behind, someone else will take the reins, someone worse." I nodded, knowing she was right. We had torn down the empire that had controlled everything, but the power it once wielded hadn't disappeared. It had scattered like seeds in the wind, waiting for someone to plant them again. "So what do we do now?" I asked, feeling the weight of the question pressing on both of us. Emily was silent for a moment, her gaze distant. "We rebuild," she said finally. "But this time, it's different. We do it right." The unexpected ally? It wasn't long before we realized that rebuilding wouldn't be easy. We had the power to destroy, but not the resources to create something from nothing. We needed allies, but the people we had once trusted were either gone or scattered. There was no clear path forward. Then, unexpectedly, Luca appeared. I had assumed. He was long gone, disappearing into the same shadows from which he had come. But when he showed up, It wasn't with a gun or a betrayal in his eyes. It was with something else. Something I didn't expect. Regret. "I've made mistakes," Luca said, his voice weary as he walked into the room where Emily and I were making plans. "But I never wanted this to end like this." Emily looked at him, her eyes hard but not unkind. "So you decided to show up now when it's too late?" Luca's expression faltered. "I know I can't undo what I did, but I can help you fix it. I owe you both that much." I could see the conflict in his eyes, the same conflict I felt in my own heart. In a world built on lies and betrayal, what could we trust anymore? But Emily, ever the pragmatist, didn't hesitate. "If you're serious, then you'll help us rebuild. We don't have time for games anymore." Luca nodded, his shoulders heavy with the weight of his own decisions. "I'm in. But we have to move quickly. There's someone else who's been watching the chaos unfold, and they're already making moves." The new threat, just as we began to find our footing, a new player emerged from the shadows, a woman named Isabella Voss, a name we hadn't encountered before. She was known for her cold efficiency and her ability to manipulate the world from behind the scenes. Isabella had been quietly picking up the pieces of the syndicate's shattered remains, consolidating power in ways we hadn't anticipated. We had thought that, with the fall of Victor and the syndicate, things would stabilize. Instead, Isabella had stepped in, and she was already moving to seize control. "She's more dangerous than we thought," Luca said one evening, pacing the room. "She's not just ruthless. She's methodical, and she knows exactly how to play the game." Emily's eyes hardened. "Then we play better. A new plan." The stakes had risen higher than ever. It wasn't just about reclaiming Emily's inheritance or destroying an underground empire. It was about stopping a new force from rising in its place. We had no choice but to go on the offensive. We couldn't afford to wait for Isabella to make the first move. We needed to find her weaknesses, understand her network. In a world of deception, trust is the most dangerous weapon and the most fragile. The descent into the abyss. The room felt like it was closing in on us, the tension thick enough to cut with a knife. Isabella's cold smile lingered in the air, and I could feel the weight of her words sinking in like a poison. We had come here to end this, to reclaim the power, to stop a new empire from rising, to finally break free of the past. But everything had changed in the blink of an eye. Luca, our ally, our friend, was now the enemy. A traitor in our midst, unknowingly handing us over to the very woman we were trying to defeat. "You thought you could win," Isabella repeated, her eyes scanning us like a predator examining its prey. "But the game was never meant for you. You were just pawns, like everyone else." Luca's face was pale, his eyes filled with regret, but there was no escape now. He had played his part, and we were too far into the web of lies to back out. He didn't even try to make an excuse. No words of redemption or apology. It was too late for that. "You've worked so hard to destroy everything I've built," Isabella continued, her voice smooth and calculated. "But I'm the one who has been pulling the strings all along. The syndicate was just a tool to teach you a lesson, a tool to control." I clenched my fists. "You don't control me," she laughed, a sharp, piercing sound that sent chills down my spine. "Oh, Jake, you still don't understand, do you? I don't need to control you. You're already under my control. All I need is for you to realize it." I turned to Emily, my eyes silently pleading for some kind of answer, some kind of plan, but her expression was unreadable. Her usual fiery determination now replaced with a quiet, intense focus. Luca's confession. Before we could react, Luca stepped forward, his voice barely above a whisper. "Jake, Emily, I never wanted this. I swear I didn't mean for you to get caught up in this, but when I made the deal with her..." He trailed off, his hands shaking. I was desperate. She had leverage over me, over everything I cared about. Emily didn't flinch. Her eyes never left him. What leverage? Luca hesitated, his gaze darting between us. She knows everything. Everything about you, Emily. About your father's empire, the inheritance you've been hiding. She knew you would come for it eventually, and she knew I was your only weak link. The words hit like a sledgehammer. I had known there were forces, pulling at our lives from all directions, but hearing it laid out so plainly, it shattered something inside of me. Emily's father's empire, the inheritance. That had always been the root of this mess, hadn't it? But I never thought it would come back to haunt us like this. So you were working for her all along, Emily said, her voice barely a whisper, but the hurt was evident. All those lies, those promises you made. Luca's face crumpled, as if every word was physically ripping him apart. I tried to get out. I wanted to tell you, Emily, but every time I did, she found a way to stop me. She kept threatening everything I cared about. You were my last chance at redemption, but it was too little, too late. Isabella's victory. Isabella stepped forward, her heels clicking sharply against the marble floor. Enough of this emotional drama, you're wasting time. There's nothing left to save. She raised her hand, and the room seemed to fall even quieter. Luca, you've done your part. Now step aside, I've got business to attend to. Luca's shoulders slumped, and without another word he backed away, fading into the shadows like a ghost. It was clear now that he wasn't going to stand with us. He had already chosen his side. I've already won, you know, Isabella continued, her eyes locking onto ours. The city belongs to me now. Your precious little empire is already crumbling. The power vacuum is gone. The criminal world has been restructured, and I hold the strings. You're nothing but a footnote in the story of my rise. But her smug smile couldn't hide the small flicker of something in her eyes. Fear, maybe? Or perhaps uncertainty? You underestimate us, I said, my voice steady despite the storm brewing inside me. If you think we're just going to walk away, you're gravely mistaken. Isabella raised an eyebrow, amusement dancing in her eyes. Oh, really? And what do you think you can do now? The unexpected turn it was then that I felt it, the slight vibration in the air, the buzz of something coming. It didn't take long for me to realize what was happening. Isabella hadn't been as secure as she thought she was. She wasn't as untouchable as she believed. In that moment, the lights in the entire building flickered. The sound of distant sirens could be heard, growing louder by the second. What is this? Isabella snapped, her calm facade cracking for the first time. You've underestimated the one thing you can never control, Emily said, her voice full of quiet menace. Us. In the aftermath of destruction, there is only one truth. Rebuilding is as dangerous as tearing everything down. The rise from the ashes, the dust had settled. The sirens had quieted, the echoes of gunfire now just distant memories. The city that had been ruled by shadows, by fear, and by power-hungry elites was now breathing again, though weakly. Emily and I stood together in the wreckage of what had been the final battleground. The once glamorous hotel was now a battlefield of shattered glass and overturned furniture, a stark reminder of what had been lost. But it was also a symbol of something new, a new beginning, or at least the chance for one. Is it over? I asked quietly, breaking the silence. Emily's eyes, still filled with the weight of everything that had happened, locked onto mine. She didn't answer right away. Instead, she just stood there, breathing in the cool night air. It's over, but the real work begins now. I knew what she meant. With Isabella's empire collapsing, the city was wide open for anyone to seize power, and there was no shortage of people who would try. But we weren't just looking for power. We were looking for something else, something more fragile, something that had been lost in the chaos. Trust, redemption, and perhaps a future we could finally build together. The aftershocks. The next few weeks were a whirlwind. There was no time for recovery. We needed to ensure that what had been destroyed stayed. Down! The remnants of the syndicate were scattered. There were still cells of loyalists, criminals trying to claim what was left, but they were nothing compared to the force we'd just toppled. It was like hunting the last rats in a collapsing ship. Luca had disappeared after the final showdown with Isabella, vanishing into the shadows once more. We had no idea whether he had lived or died. Perhaps it was for the best. He had played his part, but in the end, he had been just as much a victim as a perpetrator. Emily and I had talked about the future in the days that followed. We spoke about rebuilding, but there was something unspoken between us. We were both changed by what we had experienced, by what we had done. "Do you ever regret it?" I asked her one night, as we sat on the balcony overlooking the city that had been both our prison and our battleground. She didn't look at me, her gaze lost in the sprawling lights of the city below. Regret? Maybe, but not for what happened, for what didn't happen, the life we could have had if we'd never gotten involved in all this. I turned toward her, my heart heavy. You could have walked away from it all, Emily, before any of this started. You didn't have to do this. She glanced at me then, her eyes sharp with resolve. You think I didn't know that? But sometimes you don't get to choose what you're drawn into. It chooses you. The new alliance with Isabella gone, we knew there were still others out there who would try to take advantage of the power vacuum, but we also knew we weren't alone. We had allies, people who, like us, had seen enough of the underworld to know what had to be done. A small group of us, led by Emily and me, began to rebuild the fractured pieces of the city. We didn't want to rule it, not in the way the syndicates had. Instead, we worked to create something sustainable, something that could survive the years ahead. It wasn't about power anymore. It was about stability, protection for those who had been caught in the crossfire. There were many meetings in dark corners, at small cafes, or in the offices of the few remaining law enforcement officers who still had their integrity. We didn't make deals for ourselves anymore. We made deals for the people who had nothing left. Emily was no longer the angry woman seeking revenge. She had become something else, something stronger. I could see the change in her, the softness in her eyes. When she looked at the future instead of the past, I too had changed. The man I had been at the beginning of this journey, the naive husband, the betrayed lover, was gone. In his place stood a man who had seen the darkness up close and learned to live with it. But I wasn't bitter. I wasn't broken. I had Emily. By my side, and together, we were finding a way forward. The return of an old enemy, just when it seemed like the world was beginning to settle, a shadow from the past returned to stir the pot. It was an unexpected visitor, Victor Caruso, the man we had all thought was dead. His return was nothing like we had anticipated. He didn't show up in a flashy display of power. No, he was smarter than that. He appeared quietly, slipping into the undercurrents of the city like a ghost. We had received word of his return from a few old contacts, those still loyal to him, or perhaps those who were simply looking to cash in on the chaos. "Is he really back?" Emily asked when the news finally reached us. She didn't seem shocked, just cautious, as if she had expected this. I nodded, my jaw tight. It seems so. The final battle is not just fought with fists, but with the will to reshape a broken world. The final hour, the warehouse smelled of rust and old wood, a scent that matched the decaying empire we were about to face. Victor Caruso stood before us, his cold smile never wavering, despite the sudden intrusion of our forces. This was the endgame, the showdown that would decide the fate of the city and, in many ways, our own future. "You really think you can take me down?" Victor's voice was laced with mockery, but there was something else there, too. A flicker of fear. He knew, just as we did, that this was a battle for more than just control over the city. This was about something deeper. Survival. The old guard clinging to the remnants of their power, desperate to resist the change that was coming. Emily stepped forward, her eyes sharp and unyielding. "You had your chance, Victor. You failed. This city has already moved on, and you're not a part of its future." Caruso's eyes narrowed. "It's cute that you think you can rewrite history, Emily, but you're just a blip in the grand design. I built this city. You and your little revolution? You've just been a distraction." I couldn't let him get to me, but his words hit like a punch to the gut. He had been the puppet master all along, pulling strings behind the scenes. His empire, built on manipulation and fear, had shaped this city for years, and now it was all falling apart. But there was no going back now. I stepped forward, standing beside Emily. "Your empire is dead, Victor, and you're the last one, holding on to it. It's time to let go." Betrayal in plain sight Victor didn't respond right away. Instead, he looked past us. And that's when I realized something wasn't right. The atmosphere in the room shifted. The door behind us creaked open, and I could hear the soft shuffle of footsteps in the shadows. "Don't think you've won yet," Victor sneered. "I've always had contingencies. You're not the only ones with power." Suddenly, a dozen men appeared from the shadows, armed and ready to fight. I'd underestimated how many loyalists he had left. They'd been waiting for the right moment, just as we had. Emily's hand went to her sidearm, and I followed suit. But before we could make a move, a figure stepped into the light behind Victor, someone I had not expected to see. Jake. Emily. Luca. My heart skipped a beat. He had returned, but this wasn't the man I remembered. His eyes were cold, devoid of the warmth they once held. He looked like a shell of the person he used to be. But there was something else, something more dangerous in his gaze. "Luca, don't do this," I said, trying to reach him. "You don't owe him anything anymore. We can still fix this." Luca didn't flinch. "You think I owe you something?" he asked, his voice low, almost a growl. "No, Jake. I don't owe you a damn thing. You took everything from me. You think I could just walk away from this? From everything I've done?" His words stung more than I expected. The betrayal in his eyes, the bitterness that had grown between us, it hurt. But it wasn't the time to dwell on it. "This isn't the way, Luca," Emily said, her voice steady but tinged with regret. "This war, this game, it's not worth losing yourself." Luca's lips curled into a smirk. "You're right about one thing. It's not worth losing yourself. That's why I chose to stand with the winning side. I'm not some pawn anymore, Emily. I'm taking what's mine." Victor laughed, his hands raised in mock triumph. "That's right, Luca. You understand. Together we'll take back what's ours. This city will fall at our feet." But Emily's eyes were already moving, calculating. She had a plan. She always had a plan. The battle for the city. The tension in the room was unbearable. We had reached the final moment, and I could feel the weight of every decision, every betrayal pressing down on us. This wasn't just about power, it was about redemption, survival, and the future of the city we had fought to free. Without warning, the room exploded into chaos. Shots rang out, cutting through the air, and we were all forced to react. The fight was brutal, swift. Our forces clashed with Victor's loyalists in a whirlwind of gunfire and combat. But even in the chaos, Emily and I were in sync. We knew each other's moves before they were made, moving through the melee like we were one unit. I spotted Luca, in the corner of my eye. He was locked in a struggle with one of our men, but his gaze never left me. The hatred in his eyes was palpable, but so was the regret. He had chosen his side, but I hadn't given up on him yet. "Luca!" I shouted, but the roar of the battle drowned out my voice. He didn't look back. I knew what I had to do. The final confrontation with Victor was about more than just the two of us. It was about the city, about everything that had been lost, and everything that still could be. I pushed through the fighting, heading straight for Victor. Even in the wake of destruction, the world spins on, and so do the lives of those who have been forever changed. A silent promise. The city had begun to breathe again. The cracks in the walls, the broken promises, the bloodshed. They would take time to heal. But in the quiet moments as I walked through the streets, I could sense something different. There was hope now, not in grand gestures or dramatic shifts, but in the small, everyday acts of resilience. The people who had once been mere pawns in the game of the powerful were now the architects of their own future. Emily and I had learned something through all of this. The world doesn't wait for you to be ready to make your mark. It forces you to evolve, to adapt, to find meaning even in the darkest of places. We weren't perfect, not by any stretch of the imagination, but we had made it through the storm, and now we were rebuilding together. The long road ahead. It had been a few months since the fall of Victor Caruso and his empire. The streets were quieter, the police force stronger, and the syndicate's presence was all but a memory. But the cracks in the city, those were still visible. We had established a new kind of order, one that didn't rely on fear, one that didn't thrive on chaos. But making something sustainable was never easy. Our work had only just begun. Emily and I spent every day working with the remaining officials, trying to restore the city's sense of security. The people, our people, had been broken for so long. We needed to remind them of what was possible when they stood together. It wasn't just about controlling the streets or policing the dark corners. It was about showing them that we too had been in the dark and had found our way back to the light. "I never thought I'd be doing this," Emily said one evening as we sat on the balcony of our new apartment, watching the city glow under the setting sun. I smiled at her, tired but content. "What? Sitting on a balcony in a city we rebuilt?" She laughed, though it was tinged with something deeper, something that had been lingering since the battle had ended. "No, I mean, leading this city. I thought I'd be running from it forever. I didn't know if I'd ever have the courage to stand in front of the people, much less fight for them." "You did." I looked at her, the woman who had been through so much and yet was still standing. "We both did." But I could tell she wasn't just talking about the physical battles. She was talking about the emotional scars, the weight of everything we had gone through, the brokenness that neither of us could fully escape. "Yeah," she said, her voice quieter now. "But there's always more to be done. We've only scratched the surface." I understood what she meant. The city needed more than just us. It needed trust. It needed forgiveness. It needed healing. And it needed time. Unexpected visitors. It was a week later when the next chapter of our story began. It came in the form of a knock on the door. "Who's that?" Emily asked, her eyebrows furrowing as she stood up. She wasn't expecting anyone. I stood too, my instincts kicking in. It was late, and the city had been unusually quiet for the past few days. "I'll check it." I opened the door cautiously, my hand resting near the gun I kept by the door, just in case. But what I saw wasn't what I expected. Standing in the doorway was a familiar face. Luca. I froze, unable to believe it. He looked the same, but there was something darker about him, something that had hardened in the time we'd been apart. "Luca," I breathed, my voice a mixture of surprise and disbelief. He didn't say anything at first. His eyes swept the room, looking at Emily, who stood now beside me, equally surprised. Can we talk? Luca's voice was softer than I remembered, the ghost of the past. We let him in, despite the lingering doubts. There was something in the air between us, a tension that none of us could ignore. Luca sat across from us, his hands clenched tightly in his lap. He seemed smaller than I remembered, less like the ambitious man who had been a part of our lives, and more like a broken piece of the past trying to find a place in the present. "Why are you here?" Emily asked, her voice steady but laced, with something else, something that spoke of the hurt he'd caused. Luca swallowed hard before speaking. "I needed to say I'm sorry." I blinked, not fully understanding. "Sorry?" I repeated. He nodded slowly, his gaze never quite meeting ours. "I didn't," he faltered. "I didn't know who I was anymore. After everything, after the betrayal, I thought I could never come back from that. But I was wrong." Emily's eyes were hard. She had every right to be angry, to be furious with him for what he had done, but there was a flicker of something else, something I couldn't quite place. "You hurt us, Luca," she said, her voice quiet but firm. "You left us to pick up the pieces. And now you think you can just show up and ask for forgiveness? Sometimes when you think you've turned the page, the story keeps writing itself." A whisper in the dark weeks passed, and the city moved on, its pulse steady but fragile. The work Emily and I had started, building a new foundation, not just for ourselves but for the entire city, had begun to show signs of growth. The streets were quieter now, less haunted by the fear that had once gripped them. People were starting to trust again, beginning to rebuild what had been torn apart by years of corruption and betrayal. But even amidst the fragile peace, there were shadows lurking, things we couldn't quite see yet, but we could feel them. One evening, as I sat in my office overlooking the city, a strange sense of unease settled over me. The lights in the skyline flickered, casting long shadows across the streets below. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was coming, something I couldn't prepare for. Emily had been unusually quiet, too. She hadn't been the same since Luca's return. There was a part of her, small but undeniable, that seemed to be reopening old wounds every time she thought about him. "You okay?" I asked softly as she walked into my office, her gaze distant. She didn't answer. Immediately, just stared out the window at the lights as if searching for something beyond them. Finally, she sighed and walked over to the desk, leaning against it. I keep thinking that maybe we didn't finish what we started. I frowned, confused. "What do you mean?" She turned to me, her eyes intense. "The city, the work we did to take down Caruso, it's not over. There are still pieces of his empire we haven't found. There are still people, powerful people, who are waiting for the right moment to strike back." I felt a shiver run down my spine. "You think we've missed something?" "I don't know, but I have this feeling, Jake, like we're sitting on a time bomb and we don't even know it." I leaned back in my chair, the weight of her words sinking in. Could she be right? Had we truly eliminated every thread of Caruso's influence? Or were we overlooking something crucial? "What do we do?" I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted to know the answer. Emily's eyes met mine, and for the first time in weeks, I saw something I hadn't seen in her in a long time, a glimmer of that old fire. "We go after them. We find out who's left, and we make sure they don't get another chance to take this city back." The hidden enemy. The next few days were a blur of investigation, meetings, and sleepless nights. Emily's instincts were right. There were still factions in the city who hadn't fully relinquished their grip on power. We began to uncover small, cryptic clues, suspicious transactions, coded messages, anonymous threats, but nothing solid, enough to put the pieces together. Then, one night, as I was going through a stack of old records from Caruso's days, something caught my eye. A name, one that had never come up in any of our previous investigations. Adrian Voss, I muttered, the name under my breath, the realization hitting me like a cold wave. Voss was a name that should have been long forgotten. He had been one of Caruso's most trusted lieutenants, a man who had vanished after the syndicate's fall. Everyone assumed he had fled the city, taking whatever wealth he had amassed with him. But now it seemed he had stayed in the shadows, waiting for the right moment to strike. I showed Emily the file, and her eyes narrowed. Voss. I should have known. He was always the one who wanted power more than anyone. If anyone's left to pick up the pieces of Caruso's empire, it's him. We had to find him, and fast. He was the key to everything. A dangerous game. We tracked Voss down over the next few days, piecing together the trail he had left behind. It was clear he had been working from the shadows, building a new network, recruiting those who were still loyal to the old regime. He wasn't just trying to regain control of the city, he was planning something bigger. He's not just looking for power, Emily said as we sat in the dimly lit office, staring at the map of the city we had laid out on the table. He's building an army, an underground network of operatives ready to strike when the time is right. I clenched my fists, the anger simmering beneath the surface. We can't let him get away with this. We stop him now, or this city goes back to the way it was. But Emily's face was hard as stone, her brow furrowed in concentration. We're not just dealing with Voss anymore. He's already got people in positions of power. We can't just storm in and hope for the best. We need to be smart. We need to outplay him at his own game. It was a dangerous game. But one thing was clear. We were all in now. The truth unveiled. The search for Voss took us deep into the underbelly of the city. We moved in silence, keeping to the shadows as we gathered intel and made connections. We talked to informants, tracked money trails, and infiltrated meetings.